Hello everyone. The today tutorial it will be all about ReactJs.org. We will going to follow the React.js tutorial together. Let's click take the tutorial. Why is it important, this learning technique? I believe that hundreds and hundreds YouTube video or coding tutorials will take you to a certain level. But to go beyond, you have to start writing codes by yourself. First, as a programmer, you have to start to learn from the documentation. Who is it for this video? This is completely from beginners to all level can watch it. I'm using a time step. Feel free to jump around the video. The final version will be uploaded to GitHub. I will leave a link in the description down below. In this video, we're going to learn together and build the Tic-Tac-Toe game. Let's have a look what is the game. So this is the final version. Through this tutorial, we will learn about what is React, what are components and props, how to pass data through props, how to use the React DevTools, lifting up state from child component. We will understand what is a controlled component, why immutability is important, what is a key in React, and implementing time travel. So let's see the game, how is it works. We just click. So what happens here, we declare the winner, then we can go back in the time. This is the history of the move. We can sort it, the history of the move, and we can get a new game. And if no one's winning, is it try again, so we will call a draw. In the game, we will declare a winner, we will store the game history, allow player to review game history and see previous version of the game board, plus on the end, we will implementing the bonus elements, such as displaying the location for each move, which is column 2, row 2. Board the currently selected items. We will refactor the board squares, render to 2 for loop. Add the toggle button that lets you sort the moves, which is this one. Highlight the winner, which is this one. If no one wins, we should show a message, the result being a draw. There is a lot to cover. I am Swan, and if you like the video, do not forget to subscribe. Let's jump in. To take this lesson, so you have some experience with HTML and JavaScript, but you should be able to following along with even if you're coming from a different programming language. Also, you are familiar with programming concepts like functions, objects, arrays. So let's set up the tutorial. You have two ways to do the tutorial. One of them is the write code in the browser, which I never do that, and the second one is to do with your local development environment. That's what I'm going to do. You just click on this optional instruction for the following. You need to open your code editor, which is mine one will be Visual Studio Code, and let's make this window smaller, and we should put this side by side. Okay. To start is you make sure you have the recent version of Node.js. What is Node.js? Let's put Node.js. So make sure you have Node.js. Then let's follow the instruction here. I mean, it's so easy. You just copy out here, copy and just paste it here. I did create a directory. I call this 1b. Just paste it in and enter. And this will be creating us our React.js boilerplate. This will be takes a while. Come on React. We got created a folder which is called my app. Let's cd into the my app folder and delete all the files in the source folder of the new project. So let's have a look. We have a source folder, we have the index CSS, so we have our boilerplate. Type in rm/f star. No, first you have to make sure you go in cd space src. This is the source code. And when you are in that directory, then you can type in rm/f star. Okay, now this folder is now empty and we can cd back. Add the file named index.css in the source. Add the file here, index.css. Add this CSS code. So if I click on this code, you have the CSS boilerplate. Just copy this out, Ctrl A, Ctrl C, and go to your index.css file and save it. Okay, we can close this now. Create other file named index.js. And you have the JavaScript code here. Just copy this and save it. This is another boilerplate for starting, and add these 3 lines to the top of the index.js file, which is the top here. And now we are ready to run npm start. And this is our starting code. Let's go to index.css. I am going to replace all the CSS code to my version. And this is how it looks now. It's a little bit bigger and has a minimal design. Doesn't have any functionality yet, but we will code this together with React. You can close this window. We don't need this anymore. If you're interested about to use my CSS, more than welcome. I will leave a link in the description. What is React? React is a declarative, efficient, and flexible JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It lets you compose complex UIs from small and isolated pieces of code called components. Now, if you're looking at this index.js, we can see they're using the class component. There is two components. There is a class component and a functional component. Now, we have one, this is the board, this is the game, and we have a square. We have 3 components. I don't like all the 3 components is located at index.js file. I am going to create in the source folder a new folder called this components. And in that components folder, I will create our components. So one of them will be the square with capital S.js. And here in the square.js, if you type in on your Visual Studio Code RCE and press tab, you can have a boilerplate about class-based component. And what we're doing, we go back to our index.js, and right now this is just rendering and returning just a button. So in the square, go to the return and render this here. Okay, copy and paste. Save this, and right now we have our square component in a separate file. To use this, we have to import, so I can delete this from here, square, and we have to import square from components. Import square from components/square, which is down here, and should be everything is the same. Yes, and let's create another one in the components and call this board.js. Type in RCE and tab. By the way, if you want to use these shortcuts, ES7, I have this snippet, ES7 extension, React and Readers, or you can choose any of them, whichever you like it, but I use this one, ES7 React and Readers snippets. Now go back to the index.js and let's see what is in the board. Everything inside the render square, all the way down till here. Copy. Go to the board and you have the render and copy paste it here just to go back and delete the board classes. Yes, easy break because board is not defined, so we have to import board. The square, we don't need it here. We call the board here and board is calling the square component. So import square and save it. Everything is the same. So what we did, we have our main component, which is index.js. This is, we have our game component. In the public folder, we have our index.html. In the index.html, we have a div of root. So if you see the ID root, and we're going back to the index.js, this is the get ID of root where React app is get rendered. And this is where you render the game component. The game component has access and rendering the board component, which is this one. And the board component has a child component, which is the square one. But everything is the same how it was before, but this is more organized now. Whenever we want to change something, we just go directly to the components. Okay. So we use components to tell React what we want to see on the screen. When our data changes, React will efficiently update and re-render our component. A component takes in a parameters called props, short of properties, and returns a hierarchy of view of display via the render method. The render method, which is the render in the classes, returns a description of what you want to see on the screen. React takes the description and displays the result. In particular, render returns a React element, which is lightweight. Most React developers use a special syntax called JSX, which makes these structures easier to write. JSX comes with the full power of JavaScript. You can put any JavaScript expressions within braces inside JSX. So what you see here, this looks like HTML, but this is not. This is JSX. In the JSX, you can write HTML and also you can write JavaScript as well. Like this one, this is a JavaScript variable and you placed in, and this is say next player. If I go here, delete this, and I just put an X, that will be an X. But because we have have a variable status and save it, now we have a next player X, which is this variable. Each React element is a JavaScript object that you can store in a variable or pass around in your program. Let's inspecting the code. You notice that we have 3 React components. This is one I was talking about. We have 3 React components, which is already breakdown separately and is all connected together like it was in one page. We have the square, board and games. The square component renders a single button. So this is the square component. It's rendered just a single button, and the board component renders 9 squares. So basically we have these buttons which is get rendered. This is one button, this is one square, and the board one is rendered 9 of them. So we have the render square here, and we call this in the board class. We created a function render square and we returned the square component. So this is how we created the board. This is all a button. The game component renders the board with placeholder value, which we'll modify later. So if we go to the game component, we're rendering the board and we're gonna have the values here. We're gonna have the to-dos and we're gonna have the status here later on. Currently there is no interactive components. In React, you're passing data through props. Let's get started and let's get ready for props. So go to the board component, and in the square, let's pass a value. And value should be I. So this value will be a props, which you can catch it on the other side. I'm talking about the other side in another component, which is the square component. So what is this I? This I, because this is a function, this is a parameter, and when the argument, which is 0, 1, 2, is get passed, that I is gonna be the value for the square. And value, you can name this anything. It doesn't have to be a value. It could be box. So you can call anyhow. Okay, let's save this. So we got our I, which is 0, 1, 2, all the way down till 8. Go to the square component. How we can catch in the class-based component, the props, they can catch by the this keyword. So let's go to the square, which is our component, and change this to this.props.value. Because we pass down a props, which is a property to the square, we can have access for that. So let's console.log first this.props and save this. Console, and we have our objects. We should have 9 objects, and let's click on the last one. When we go in here, we have the value of the 8. So if I click console.logprop.value, then we just have the number. Let's delete this. So let's replace this to this.props.value. And let's get to here before I save it. And now let's save it. And yes, we got rendered the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we got the numbers. And where this number are coming from? This number is passed down as a props. We catch the props with this.props.value or whatever name we give. Because if I change this, let me go back to the board. And if I change this to wall, I save it. Now it shouldn't work. And I go back here and I change this to wall and it works again. So let's go back. This value is coming from these props, these numbers, and the I is get passed here, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this is what we're going to see. Yes. Okay, congratulations. You just learned what is props, which is properties, how to pass them down to another component, and how to catch the props and render them to the DOM. So let's make this an interactive component. Let's fill the square component with an X when we click it. First change the button tag that is returned from the square component. Okay, so let's go to the square component. And here, after the class name, we should call an event, which is onClick. And this onClick takes a function. And in the function, what we want to do, we just want it to console.log the click. That's it. Save it and go back to our React, open the console and just clicked. So when we're clicking, always get the render. So we are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times I was clicking already. To be honest, I don't like to use Opera for any development purposes. So let's use Chrome and use the developer tool from here. Good. This is much better. We can have access to the Redux React tools. This is where we can see the components. We have the board, we have the square. The square component has already a value, which is here, say 0. Okay, let's go back to the console. Good. Working, click, click, click happened. To save typing and avoid the confusing behavior of this keyword here, we're gonna use the arrow function. So let's change it on click, just a simple arrow function, which is delete the function, do this. And we don't even need this one. That's it. Save it. We're still the same? Yes, still the same. Click. Okay. So what is onClick? So onClick is basically just handling an event. Right now we're handling an onClick event. And we're calling a callback function and executing this callback function. Right now we're executing the console.log click. So what is the next step? As a next step, we want to square component to remember that it got clicked and fill it with an X mark to remember things components use state. Now this is where we got excited when we're talking about states. React component can have state by setting this.state in their constructor. This.state should be considered as a private to a React component. Let's store the current value of the square in this.state and change it when the square is clicked. Go to the square one, which is here, and let's create a constructor. And the constructor take the props, and we always use super, which is the props, and this.state equal to value, which is null. Let's save it. In JavaScript classes, you need to always call super when you're defining the constructor of a subclass. All React component classes that have a constructor should start with a super props call. This is required when we need to access some variables of its parent classes. Props, it is a special keyword that is used in React, stands for properties, used for passing data from one component to another. So now, instead of using a props here, which is we're logging out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, instead we should change this and use our state. And this.props value, we should replace it this.state.value. Let's change this to state. If I changed it, now we should have null everywhere, which is nothing. And in the onClick, which is this event, in the function, we should change the this.setState to the value X. In React, we cannot just mutate or change the state, like state equal to this, state equal to that. We have to use the setState method. So let's delete this console.log and this.setState, and this is an object, so value should be X. By calling this.setState from an onClick handler in the square's render method, we will tell React to re-render the square whenever its button is clicked. After the update, the square's this.state value will be X. So every single time, let me save this, when we click on one of our square, this function get called and the setState will be going to update the value. So let's give a try. Oops, and now we have an X. So instead of click, now we have an X and we filled up with X's. When you calling the setState in a component, React automatically update the child components. I'm highly recommend, if you use Chrome or Firefox, download the developer tools, which is the React developer tool. I showed this earlier. Mine one is already installed. If I go to the components, and now we're going to the squares. We have all the squares here. If I click one of the square, you see it's highlighted. And we can see the value is 0. This is a value of 2. But this is the props value. And when we're going to the state, which is the state, we can see the value of X. So let's give a refresh. I make this bigger. Let's go to the square. We have the value of null. If I click on this one, and now we have value of X. This is how quickly it gets changed. You see that? After inside the React DevTools, you can right click on any elements on the page, click inspect to open the DevTools. This is what we did earlier. Will appear the last stops in the right use components. Yes, this is what we did. And we can see if you click on it, we have the state is updated. Yes. So the next step, we have to alternative placing the X and 0. But before that, we have to do the lifting the state up. Because right now, the state is get controlled in the bottom level. And this is not a good practice. State should get controlled in the top level component, which is the game component, index.js. Like here it says, currently each square component maintains the game state. To click for a winner, we'll maintain the value of each of the 9 squares in one location. So we have to leave the states up to the parent component. Parent component can pass the state back down to the children by using props. So if we put the state up to the parent component here, then we can pass it down to the board, and from the board we can pass it down to the square. This keeps the child components in sync with each other and with the parent component. Lifting state into parent component is common when React components are refactored. Let's take the opportunity to try it out and constructor to the board and set the board initial state. Okay, so what we're doing now, so go to the board component and here above the render square, we should create a constructor with the props. Don't forget super props. This dot state equal to squares. And we should create an array with 9 elements and fill them with null. Save it. So later on when we're going to fill them, we're gonna have something like this. 0x null. So which one is empty is null. The rest one is filled up where we're clicking 0 and x. So let's modify the render square method, props, the value. Let's modify to this array what we was creating here, the squares, which is an array of 9 nulls now. Value is equal to this dot state squares. Let's have a look at the code now. Each square will now receive a value prop that will either be an X, an O, or a null for empty squares. So the board component now maintains which squares are filled. Next, we need to create a way for the square to update the board state. Since state is considered to be private to the component that defines it, we cannot update the board state directly from square. Instead, we pass down a function from the board to the square and we'll have square call the function when the square is clicked. So the render square method, go to the board, we have the value and we should have return, we need to open in new lines. So we should have the value and on click. So let's pass down a function props, this dot handle click, which is not exist yet, I. Save it. We are passing now 2 props from board value and onClick. The onClick prop is a function that square can call when clicked. We make the following changes to square. So go to the square one. We're gonna take out the state from here now and we're gonna change back to this dot props dot value. So it's gonna be looks like this. We're gonna go back how it was before. So go to props dot value and replace the set state. We have the onClick, we have the function, and in the function instead of the set state we should call the onClick, but we catched it as a props. So this dot props dot onClick. We don't need the constructor, so we can delete all the constructor from the square component. Oh, this is getting cleaner now. So when square is clicked, the onClick function provided by the board is called. So first, the onClick prop on the built-in DOM button component tells to React to set up a click event listener. When the button is clicked, React will call the onClick event handler that is defined in square's render method. The event handler called this props onClick, which is this one. The square onClick props was specified by the board. So basically is this onClick props. This is an event listener and catching the props which is coming from the board. So since the board passed the onClick, this handler click to square, the square calls the board handler click when clicked. We have not defined the handler click yet. The DOM button elements onClick attribute has a special meaning to React because it is a built-in component. For custom components like square, the naming is up to you. We could give any name to the square's onClick prop or board's handler click method and the code would work the same. Just to clarify, yeah, we are in the square. We're calling this event, but you can call this anyhow because this is a prop. But it's like it said here, it's convenient to use the same method name. So this is why we call onClick. This onClick is coming from here. So this is the onClick value, which is here. This is a props. This is not an event handler. This is a props. And this props is get called when you click on there on the square and is get executed and called the handler click method, which is not existing yet. Let's create that. In the board, under the constructor, let's create a handler click method. Handler click, which is take a parameter I and create the squares equal to this dot state dot squares slice. I will explain you why. Squares I equal to X. And this dot set state, so we have to modify the state. Squares, just squares. The rest of the code is the same. So after these changes, it says we are able to click again. Refresh. Yes, but we have X's everywhere. So what happening? After these changes, we are again able to click on the squares to fill them, the same as we had before. However, now the state is stored in the board component instead of the individual square components. When the board state changes, the square components re-render. Since the square component no longer maintains state, the square components receive values from the board component. The square components are now controlled component. This is what they call controlled component, because controlled by the parent component. So the board has full control over them. Note how the handler click will call slice to create a copy of the squares array. So basically is the slice to create a copy of the squares array to modify instead of modifying the existing array. Basically slice is just creating a shallow copy of the original array where we are here. Squares, we're creating a new squares which is coming from the original one. Every single time when we click, we have the original array, which is the squares array of 9, and the squares I, which is I coming from the click, which one we click, is get replaced by an X. And the set state, the squares, is get updated with the new array. So the squares I now, if I click in this one, this is number 0. So if I click in this one, the 0 is get replaced in the first one. So the square 0 is get replaced with X. And the set state is replacing. So this can get replaced for the new array. Hopefully this makes sense. In the previous code example, we suggested that you create a copy of the squares array using the slice method instead of modifying the existing array. We'll now discuss immutability and why immutability is important to learn. There are generally two approaches to changing data. The first approach is to mutate the data by directly changing the data values. So basically is directly when you change this.state.squares equal to 2, which is danger. The second approach is to replace the data with a new copy which has the desired changes. So basically is with the second method what we did, we have exactly the same, the rest of the array, the 9 element is the same, just only one get changed, which is the squares I. So immutability makes complex features much easier to implement. Later in this tutorial, we will implement a time travel feature that allows us to review the Tic-Tac-Toe game's history and to jump back to the previous moves. The main benefit of immutability is that it helps you build pure components in React. Immutable data can easily determine if changes have been made, which helps to determine when a component requires to re-rendering. So let's talk about function components. So now the next step, we're going to change the square component, the function component. In the React, function components are a simpler way to write components that only contain a render method and don't have their own state. Instead of defining a class which extends React component, we can write a function that takes props as input and returns what should be rendered. I'm being honest, I never use a class component anymore because React is introduced the hooks, and hooks is allowed you to manage states in the functional components like how you can do in the classes. But this will be in another tutorial. Let's change the square class component to a function component. Let's delete all of this. And usually what I do, I type in REFCE and tab. And now we have a function component here. We don't need import React. Let's return a button. And inside in the button, we should use the props value. Because this is a functional component, you don't have to use the keyword of this. But even better, instead of to write here props.value, we can destructure and just use the keyword of value. Voila, and this is much simpler. And let's use the class name square, and the onClick, because we still need the event handler. Let destructure the onClick as well. OnClick and onClick. Let's have a look if it's still running our program. Yes. Still doing this weird behaving, but no errors. Okay, so we have changed this .props to props both times in a pairs. So just notes the difference. Let me copy this. So this is how it was before in the class-based component when we call the onClick, and we have to call the function and this props.click. And now in the functional component, this is how it gets changed. It's so much shorter and easier. So let's go to the board constructor, which is here. We have the this.state, we have the squares, which is an array. And after the squares, we can use the X is next equal to true. So each time a player moves, X is next, a boolean will be flipped to determine which player goes next, and the game state will be saved. We'll update the board handle click function to flip the value X is next. Go to the handle click, and in the handle click, squares I equal to if this dot state dot X is next is true, this is a ternary operator, then X, and else do O. And we have this dot set state squares and X is next should be opposite of this dot state X is next, and save this. So let's change the status as well in the board. Next player X status to next player delete X plus this dot state dot X is next, the same X or O. Save it and let's see where we are now. Let's find out where is the issue. Something I messed up. What did I mess up? I need an I here. That was an issue. Okay, I found out the problem. And now, next player. We have a logic. Where we go? Okay, we keep going it, we keep clicking. Obviously, we keep overwriting. But this is a progress. Let's go to the next one. So let's declaring the winner. We show which player's turn is next. We should also show when the game is won and there are no more turns to make. Copy this helper function and paste it at the end of the file. Now, this is the only time when we are going to copy something, because this is just a helper function. Not much things to do with React. Copy to the bottom. We have our helper function. Basically, this is the winning. When this is match, is winning. So we call the calculate winner squares at the board. Render function to check if player has won. If a player has won, we can display text such as winner X or winner O. We replace the status declaration on board render function with this code. So we have the calculate winner. First of all, I'm copying this in the wrong place. This should be go to the board, because this is where we have our state right now. In the future we will going to move to the main one. We have this const status next player. We change all of these and let's create a winner. Const winner equal to calculate winner this dot state dot squares. Every single time when is get changed is get re-rendered. Let status, if winner is true, then the status will be winner plus winner. Else status equal to next player this dot state dot X is next. If it's true, X, else if it's false will be O. Save it. Go to the handle click function, which is in the board. If calculate winner squares or squares I, then just return. Winner is 0 and he's not letting me to choose again. Winner is X. Oh, this is working now. We have a working tic-tac-toe. This is fully functioning. X 0 X 0. 0 is the winner. So it's fully functioning, we cannot click ahead. Good. Adding time travel. As a final exercise, let's make it possible to go back in time to the previous moves in the game. Storing a history of moves. If we're mutating the squares array, implementing time travel would be very difficult, obviously. We use the slice to create a new copy of the squares array, which is true here. After every move and treated it as an immutable, yes. This will allow us to store every past version of the squares array and navigate between the turns that have already happened. We store the past squares array in another array called history. The history array represents all board states from the first to the last move and has a shape like this. So this is how the history array will be looks. So now we need to decide which component should own the history state. So let's lift things lifting state up again. So we want the top level game component to display a list of past moves. It will need access to the history to do that. So we will place the history state in the top level game component. Placing the history state into the game component, let us remove the squares state from its child board component. So we're gonna remove all the constructor and everything, and we're gonna move them to the index.js. It will be fun. Just like we lifted state up from square component into the board component, we are now lifting up from the board into the top level game component. This gives the component, the game component, full control over the board data and lets it instruct the board to render previous turns from the history. We set up the initial state for the game component within the constructor. Let's do this. This is the game component. It's quite empty. We will fill this up again. Constructor props. Use the super props. This dot state equal to. Now this is where we have our history, which is an array. And in the array, we're gonna pass the squares array 9 and we fill with null. And obviously we have the as is next is true. Next we have the board component receive squares and onClick props from the games component. We're gonna pass everything down here as a props. So first we need to delete the props from the board component. Let's clear this up. Now we break probably, yeah, this will be got break. Replace this dot state square I with this dot props square I in the board render square. So we have this dot square. We have to change. Replace this dot handle click I with this dot props on click I on board render square. So we need to change this to the value and the on click because we're going back to the props again. So that's mean we need to move the handle click as well soon up. So we're doing the board component now looks like this. Yes, I know. We'll update the game component render function to use the most recent history entry to determine and display the game status. So this dot state, which is the calculate winner, then I have to move the calculate winner function. I have to move this to the bottom. Okay, and in the board history, this is going to the game component, which is going under the render. And the board, it looks like this. And the status should looks like this. So now we have access to the status. So since the game component is now rendering the game status, we can remove the corresponding code from the board render method. After refactoring, the board's render function looks like this. Wow. Wow. This is completely get cleared up. We remove this, which is already in the game one. And also we're removing this one, the status. Save it. Calculate winner, because handle click will got moved as well. So finally we need to move the handle click method from the board component to the game component. We also need to modify handle click because the game component state is structured differently. Within the game handle click method we concatenate new history entries on the history. Let's delete this, the whole thing, and we just have the render square. Okay, and the handle click, this should be changed, the whole handle click. The handle click will be here. Save it. Are we have any more error? Looks like not. It's functioning. Winner is 0. Good. It is functioning. We have the history this.state history. We're creating the history. The current, we're creating a current, which is the history length -1. Current is always, because the history is an array and we're storing objects. The current is stored the last history object, which is the last squares key value pair. We have the squares equal to current squares.slice. So we're gonna make the current one a shallow copy again. We're gonna calculate the winner here. And in the set state, we have the history, and we're gonna use the concat squares, and this is got changed for the next one. Instead of the array push method, we're using the concat method, which doesn't mutate the original array, so we prefer it. So let's show the past moves. Since we are recording the Tic-Tac-Toe game's history, we can now display it to the player as a list of past moves. In JavaScript, arrays have a map method that is commonly used for mapping data for other data. Using the map method, we can map our history of moves to React elements representing buttons on the screen and display a list of buttons to jump to past moves. So when we're going to our render, after when we're calculating a winner, let's create a moves. Const moves equal to history.map, which is take a callback function with two parameters, step and move, and const equal to move. If it's true, then go to move plus move, or go to game start and return an li with a button, and then the button has a on click. On click and contain an arrow function. This dot jump to move, and here should be the desk. And also for the button, I would love to give a class name history button. Save it, and down here we're gonna use moves. Save now. Go to game start. So each child in the list should have a unique key prop. As we iterate through history array, step variable refers to the current history element value, and move refers to the current history element index. We are only interested in the move here, since step is not getting assigned to anything. For each move in Tic-Tac-Toe game's history, we create a list item, li, which contains a button. The button has an on-click handler, which calls a method called this.jumpTo. We haven't implemented the jumpTo method yet. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. Let's talk about what is a key props in React and why we need it. A key is a special string attribute you need to include when creating lists of elements in React. Keys are used in React to identify which items in the list are changed, updated, or deleted. In other words, we can say that keys are used to give an identity to the elements in the list. When we render a list, React stores some information about each rendered list item. When we update a list, React needs to determine what has changed. When a list is re-rendered, React takes each list item's key and searches the previous list items for a matching key. If the current list has a key that didn't exist before, React creates a component. Keys tells React about the identity of each component, which allows React to maintain state between re-renders. Key is a special and reserved property in React. If no key is specified, React will present a warning and use the array index as a key by default. Array indexes is not recommended to use as a key value. The best practice to use a unique ID, but keys do not need to be globally unique. They only need to be unique between components and their siblings. Let's implementing the time travel. In the Tic-Tac-Toe game's history, each past move has a unique ID, which is associated with the sequential number of the move. The move are never reordered or deleted. On this case, safe to use the move index as a key, but in a real life project, use a unique ID. When we're going to the game component and we're going to our li, we should give a key equal to the move, which is the index. Save it, and probably our error is gone. Perfect. We have our history here, this is our history. But right now, if I click on this, we're gonna have an error because the function, the jump to, is not defined yet. But we have our history here already. Let's go back. Now we define the jump to method. Let's create the jump to method under the handler click, which is handler click down here. And we should create jump to, and it takes a parameter step, and this does set state, step number, step, and x is next. It will be step modulus by 2 equal to 0. So we can have true or false, which makes sense if it's even or odd number. We will now make a few changes to the game's handler click method, which fires when you click on the square. Go to the history, handler click. We have our history here, this.state.history, and we want it to slice history.slice, and we want to slice from 0 this dot state dot step number plus 1. And step number is became the history length down here. In the set state, step number, history length. Save. We still need to make some changes. Finally, we will modify the game components render method from always rendering the list move to rendering the currently selected move according to step number. So current history, this dot step number, which is here, current history, this dot state dot step number. Save this. Let's give a try. Go to move 2. Go to move 1. And it's working. Time travel is implemented. Have fun with this game. Congratulations, you just created a Tic-Tac-Toe game. For practice purposes, pause the video here and try to finish the bonus points. So which is the following: display the location for each move, build the currently selected item in the move list, rewrite board to use 2 loops, add the toggle button to let you sort the moves. When someone wins, highlight the 3 squares. When no one wins, display a message about the result being draw. In the rest of the tutorial, I'm gonna speed up a little bit and I'm going to finish the bonus. So before we start this, I would love to change a little bit my design of the code. Let's go to the index.css. I will paste the CSS code here. Let's see the changes. So this is how it looks, the final results for me now. I just changed a little bit the style and the color. And now let's implementing all the bonuses. I would love to start to use 2 loops to make the squares instead of the hard coding them. The reason why, because in the loops, then I can use the indexes, so where I can display the number 1. So I'm gonna start the number 3 points, then I go back to the number 1. Go to the board and let's create a function here. We're creating a function render board with the size. So first I equal to 0. This is the first iteration. Then y equal to 0 here. Now this here is going to be 0 multiplied by the size 3, which is 0, plus 0, it will be 0. The first element in the row, it will be 0. Then going to the next one. Next iteration will be the middle one, it will be 1. This will be 0, and the next will be 1. Next one, j will be 2. I is still 0. 0 multiplied by 3 is still 0, plus 3, which is it's gonna be 3. Now this loop is finished now, so it's coming out, and in the board we're gonna push in this JSX. Sorry, here I wanted to say 2. We're going to the next iteration when I is changing to 1. J is 0. Multiplied by 3 is 3, plus 0, it's 3. Then this is changed to 1. 3 plus 1, it will be 4, and so on, 5. Then we're going to the next one when I equal to 2. This is 0. And the last one will be 8. We're exiting in this loop and we're returning the board, which is this one. And here in the bottom, we should have a return. The render will change to this div and we're calling the render board with number 3. Let's save it. Each child in the list should have a unique key props. In the squares, I'm going to give a key, which will be I. And we got completely the same. Let's console.log board. So now we can see we have this 0, 1, 2, the key props. We get this 3 one. We have a 0. The props is contain 3 arrayed, and the children has the 0, 1, 2. If I go to the second one, props, children, 3, 4, 5. Now let's delete this, clear this console. We finish this, rewrite the board using 2 loops. And now display the location for each move in the format. When we render the square here, we store these numbers. I would love to store the row and the column numbers. So instead of returning 0, 1, 2 as a row, I want to return an array of 0. And here, I would love to return inside an array as 1 and 1. So this is the first iteration. This will be 0, 1, 2 and 0, 1, 3. So this is the location of the column and a row. To do this, here, I'm using an array now, but we could use an object as well, maybe easier. So I changed this, so we got the first part and I have the second part. But because I made these changes, here the key will be the first element, which is the 0. But now we have to change this everywhere for 0, 0. To catch this in the index.js, which is in the game, after the squares array fill null, I'm having a second key value pair, location, and it will be an empty array. Then in the squares here, I should update this location I1, which is the second part of the array, what we saved. I have to update this to 0 and I0. Change it. And down here, where we have the step, in the render, when we're mapping through, we can use the step now. Go to move, we have to change for the following. Let's save this. Oh, column 1, row 1. Column 1, row 3. Let's say this. Column 3, row 1. 3, 3. Good. Next player is X. Let's have a winner. Winner is X. Good. Number 2 is done. Let's go to the next one. Bold the currently selected item in the move list. So this is very simple. We just go to the button here. We are highlighting all these buttons and just make a condition. If it's the move equal to the this.state.step number, then this is a strong element. Otherwise, just a normal one. Let's have a look. And it's working. So this is a strong element. If I click there, that will be a strong element. You see? So it is working. This is done. This is done. This is done. Or the toggle button that let you sort the moves in either ascending or descending order. How I did this, I created a new component and I call this toggle.js, which is takes on toggle and the button props. Save it. I close this. Then in the top, import toggle. I will start with is toggle will be false, by default will be false, and let's create under the jump to a function which is on toggle, and this is will flip the is toggle to the opposite, and in the bottom just under this div I place the toggle and the 2 props I will pass it down to the toggle and call this arrow function, and in arrow function we trigger the on toggle, and the button will be depends from the state of toggle, is it up or a down arrow. Let's save this. Now in the moves I would change this. If it's false it will be move, if it's true it will be the reversed one. So let's save this. X is winning and I can sort this. X is winner. Let's put in this full screen. I think this should be true first. Let's save it. And now it's coming in the right order. Okay, this is works. Sort it. And let's get to the next one, which is when someone wins, highlight the 3 square that caused the win. This wasn't that easy. So I have to return it here. I have to return an object. We got the winner and we have the winning cells. In the board, let's pass it down the props, which is winning square. If it's winner, winning cells, otherwise it's an empty array. And the winning cells is coming from here. So we're sending down in props the ABC. If it's here the winner, that should be the winner, which is again coming from this object. In the board, we need to catch this as a props. We have to pass it down to the square. And in the square, we have the class name. And we change the class name for the following. If it's winning square, then we adding this class name, otherwise will be null. I do not like the way how this is formatted, so we have to destructuring the props. And this should be value. Okay, now this is fine. Let's have a look. And yes, we have a winning square. So this is red. Let's go to the next one. When no one wins, display a message about the result being draw. This should be easy. We're going back to the status of winner. And let's have a look. Let's create another one. O X O X. No winner, try again. Good. This is working again. We can sort this. We can move back. let's move it to next player X, 0, X, 0, X, 0, X. No winner, try again. Let's have another. Go back in time. X, 0, X, 0, X, 0 and X. And we have a winner, X. We can sort this. We have a properly functioned tic-tac-toe game. Leave a comment down in the description if you find a better solution. There is loads of different ways you can implement these bonuses. And see you at the next one. Happy coding. Bye.